Hello, everybody. I'm very excited to be here today, coming from New York, and talk to you about my book, Emotional Inheritance, A Therapist, Her Patients, and the Legacy of Trauma. So I'll start with this idea of emotional inheritance. What is emotional inheritance? How do we inherit emotions? How does it look? How do we recognize it? And all of those ideas are in my book. And I want to start with telling you, most people do not come to therapy because they want to examine their emotional inheritance. They come to therapy for other reasons that we call symptoms. Physical symptoms, anxiety, PTSD, relationship issues. They come to us and then slowly we dive into their history, we dive into their family history, and what we find hidden inside is their family legacy. Every family carries some history of trauma. Every trauma is held within a family in a unique way and leaves its emotional mark on those who are yet to be born. The idea of emotional inheritance means that somehow our parents and grandparents' experiences, and I'm emphasizing grandparents because the idea that our parents' experiences impact who we are is known. But the idea that our grandparents' traumas and unprocessed experiences impact who we are is something that people usually don't think about. And I run a lot of workshops. And sometimes at the beginning of a workshop, I ask people, who has a family history of trauma in their history? It's very early in the morning, so I'm not going to do that to you. But at the end of every workshop, then I ask people again, who has family history of trauma? Usually at the beginning, half of the people raise their hand. And you can imagine that at the end, everybody raises their hand, right? Because we all have some trauma in our history. And in the book, I talk about my own family and my own family trauma and how I work with patients. And I'll give you one brief story. In one of the workshops that I gave a few months ago, and that was a workshop for clinicians, for therapists. And I asked that question, and some of the people said they don't actually have, or they don't know their family history. And at the end, one woman raised her hand and she said, "Today I realized something. In my previous career, I was a midwife. And as we were talking, I realized that my grandmother died when she gave birth to my mother. And it was the first time I made the link between my family history and my choice of careers." And that is to say, and that is not unusual, right? That our emotional inheritance impacts who we are. It impacts not only our symptoms, our pain, our psychological struggle, but also the choices we make and the choices we cannot make. And with this specific woman, the choice she made was unconscious, and I'm a psychoanalyst, I believe in the unconscious. The choice she made was an unconscious decision to repair the past, to repair something that happened many, many years ago, and not to her. So, traumatic events leave us stuck in a state of helplessness and terror, and this is from Van der Kolk. And it results in change in how we perceive danger. So quickly, I'll tell you quickly the history, because the idea that our emotional inheritance impacts our life is not new. In fact, psychoanalysis started talking about what we call intergenerational transmission of trauma after World War II. And when a second generation came and people felt that the traumas impacted the next generation. It's what I call in the book the me search. We all have, I tell my students, right, we all have a me-search as researchers because we want to know ourselves. We really understand something intuitively and then we go and research it. So intergenerational transmission of trauma, the first psychoanalytic conference was in the 60s. And the understanding was that the next generation actually seemed more in pain than the actual first generation who experienced the trauma itself. And you can find that research on, the internet, even when you look at the 90s on epigenetic research that confirmed what we psychoanalysts wrote about in the 50s and 60s. And the research clearly shows, and that research is especially on anxiety and PTSD, that the second generation's pain seems almost as if they were the generation that actually experienced the trauma. They were more troubled than the first generation, which is an interesting idea. How does that happen? So briefly, how do we understand how emotional inheritance, and I'll also give you a few ways to think about your own emotional inheritance. So the people who we love and those who raised us live inside us. What does that mean, right? We experience their emotional pain. We dream their memories. We know what was not explicitly conveyed to us. And these things shape our lives in ways that we don't fully understand. And we don't always understand. And these are the people that I see in my practice, right? What does it mean that the people who raise us live inside us? As children, we are tuned in to our attachment figures. And so let me say something brief about attachment. Attachment is the unit that helps the child survive, the parent-child, the people that raise us. In order to survive, we need to be tuned in to the people that bring us, right? We need to really be tuned in and know when danger is coming, where we can have what we need in order to grow. And so we are dependent on these people. We register, therefore, not only what they say, but especially what they do not say. We register the omission. We register the silences. We register their gaps, what they don't tell us. And we monitor their physical gestures, their facial expressions, their moods, and their rhythms. A lot of what I'm talking about here today is based on infant research. Infant research, and again, this is something we have only 5 more minutes, so I'll do it briefly. Infant research you can find online, and Dr. Beatrice Beebe from Columbia University is the main infant researcher that I refer to. And infant research on parent-infant interaction is a video analysis of parents and infants. And though it shows us very clearly in those moment-by-moment analysis that babies respond to their parents' implicit signals from the moment of birth. I mean, those researchers are really, for some of them are about sucking pacifiers from the moment the baby is out. And on the attachment research is from 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months, predicting future attachment. So we are really seeing that they are listening to their implicit from the moments they are born, and they hear what I call in the book the unsaid and the unspeakable. In the book I call that the ghosts of the unsaid and the unspeakable. So let me take you a little bit into the therapy room and how do we actually listen to our emotional inheritance? How do we recognize it? What do we know? And I like to use the metaphor of detectives because Freud was known for liking Sherlock Holmes. And the analytic method is a little bit like that. It's a little bit like listening to the cues. Like detectives, we follow the signs. And we listen. We listen not only to what is said, but also to the pauses. We're listening to the omissions. We're listening to stories untold. So there are two ways, usually, that emotional inheritance is transmitted from generation to generation. One is I call the too muchness, and the other one is the not enoughness. The too muchness is the form of communication between children and parents, where the parents basically tell the child too much, inflicts pain, floods the child with too much information. And in those cases, what I see in my practice, kids have a very strong reaction to hearing too many stories, to hearing too much. The other extreme is, and I think that's the most parents, because they want to protect their children from pain, and they want to protect their children from their pain, and they want to protect themselves from listening to their pain, from re-experiencing and reenacting their pain. They don't talk about the trauma of the past. There is silence, and there is a way in which the child lives with a feeling, and I give a lot of those experiences in the book, the feeling that something went wrong, but they don't actually know what it is. And then a lot of parents ask me, so what do we do, right? How do we talk to our children about the past without flooding them and re-traumatizing them on one hand, or without, on the other hand, not telling them anything and keeping secrets? The answer is that when we talk about secrets of the past, we first have to process our own experiences. We have, first of all, sit with our own pain and process it. We don't want to process it through our children. We don't want to tell them, and that's how we process it. And we treat secrets and telling secrets not as an event. It's not an event where we are coming and saying, hey, I have a secret to tell you, but as a process that starts in stages. And let's talk about the detective. I'm going back to our own emotional inheritance. And one of my favorite ways to talk about it is to talk about names. One of the ways, I'm giving you a little clue that you can find in the book, many more ways in which we could look for our emotional inheritance. But my favorite one is a name. Names contain the memory of the past as well as the vision of the future. What does that mean? So each of you can think about your name. And these are the questions that I usually ask in therapy. What is your name? What is the meaning of your name? Who gave you your name? That's an important question. Who gave you your name? Was this your mother? Your father? Did they agree? Did they not agree? Is that my name, Galit, was given to me by my great uncle. He was the patriarch of the family. You will probably not be surprised that half of my career I spent on gender studies and feminism. Because in my family, my mother didn't have much voice to name me. And for me, that was a way, that's part of my emotional inheritance. It's not all of my emotional inheritance, but it's a piece of it. Who gave you your name? Why did they give you your name? Were you named after a dead relative? If so, or anybody that you know, that was important to the family? If so, who was that person? What were the feelings about that person? So there are many more layers there hidden in your name. And that is only one example of how we start the detective work of finding our emotional inheritance. And I will end with the way trauma is transmitted through our minds and through our bodies. But so is resilience and healing. And that's important for me to end like that because, you know, as analysts and therapists, we usually focus on where our patients need us, their pains, the unprocessed experiences. But the truth is that our own existence is a proof that survival is possible. We would not exist if our parents did not survive or our grandparents did not survive. And that's something that we have to remember as well, that we carry in us not only the traumas of the past, but also the ability to survive and resilience. Thank you so much.